Captain, John Herrick, sent an urgent message that read, "Review of action makes many reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful." Johnson was not shown the Herrick message. That afternoon, he had his own agenda. He had decided to address the nation, to announce his decision to bomb North Vietnamese targets. He also wanted to notify the Congress that he was going to seek all necessary powers to deter future North Vietnamese aggression. He telephoned a congressman from Texas.
We're going to retaliate, and we'll make an announcement a little later in the evening, the next hour or so, and we'll probably ask Congress for a resolution tomorrow or next day to support us. Oh, yes. Well, as you know, you'll get whatever you want, but I don't know. I hope so. If you don't react when they shoot at your ships on the high seas 60 miles from shore,
you can't appear to be weak or appeasing on a thing when the issue is so clearly drawn.
They attacked us yesterday, and they attack us again today.
Yeah. You're on the right track, Mr. President. And thanks so much for calling.
Thank you. Bye.
Meanwhile, out on the carriers, men were struggling to reconfigure their planes for a ground attack. The president was desperate to announce the bombing before the television audience was fast asleep and the final editions of the next day's papers had been put to bed. The TV networks were admitted to the White House soon after 10. To avoid warning Hanoi of retribution to come, Johnson had agreed to delay his broadcast until American planes were over their targets. At 11:25 p.m., he put on his jacket, leaving McGeorge Bundy, his national security advisor, to take the long-awaited call from McNamara at the Pentagon. McNamara made the call while many of the planes were still standing on the flight deck of the U.S. carriers.
Yes?
Secretary McNamara on 90.
They launched 40 minutes ago. Oh, that's good. Definite? Definite. Affirmative. Confirmed. Confirmed. Yes. Thank heaven. We're going in about 10 minutes. All right, that's sure. That's excellent. You're certain you're going in 10 minutes? In about 10. That's all right from your point of view, isn't it? I just want to plan it here. Definite. Confirmed launch 40 minutes ago. Thank you, Bob. Okay, thanks.
It was after 11:30 p.m. on the East Coast before Johnson announced
Swift and sure has been U.S. retaliation for communist PT boat attacks on the high seas.
the Americans would have been justified in responding if the attack had actually taken place. However, within days, Johnson would be shown compelling evidence that there had been no North Vietnamese strike against either the Maddox or the Turner Joy on August 4, 1964. Still, the Congress was assured by senior administration officials that the evidence of an unprovoked attack in international waters was overwhelming. Among them, Robert McNamara, who drove the 2 miles from the Pentagon to Capitol Hill to brief senators.
Committee on Foreign Relations this morning will come to order.
He assured members of the Foreign Relations Committee that the U.S. Navy played no part in, nor had any knowledge of, any covert operations underway from Da Nang.
We are following a policy of restraint. And I think it's a policy that each of us as citizens of this country should be proud of, and it's a policy that the credit for which belongs to the President, the Commander-in-Chief.
He failed to mention that the missions were actually run by the U.S. Navy SEALs. Senator J. William Fulbright, chairman of the powerful Foreign Relations Committee, would later accuse the Secretary of Defense of a calculated deception. Whatever the intent, the result at the time was a ringing endorsement from the United States Senate.
On the whole, I think the hearings were very satisfactory. There was just near unanimous support for, not only for everything you've done, there was unanimous support for that, but near unanimous support for everything you may do in the future. And generally a blank check authorization for further action.
Johnson wasn't interested in debating whether the North might have been acting in self-defense, and was beside himself when the loquacious Senator Hubert Humphrey talked about the commando raids in public. Johnson, determined to protect the authorized version of events, called a mutual friend.
Mr. Rowe.
Hello?
Jim?
Yes, Mr. President. This boy, our friend Hubert, is just destroying himself with his big mouth. He went on the TV, and every person in town that's handling war plans, it just scared them to death because he just blabbed everything that he had heard in a briefing. They said, for instance, how would you account for these pitiable attack on our destroyers when we innocently out there in the Gulf 60 miles from shore? Humphrey said, well, we have been carrying on some operations in that area. And we've been having some covert operations where we have been going in and knocking out roads and petroleum things and so forth. And that's exactly what we have been doing. He just got to understand that you can't talk about war plans. You just can't talk about it. And he just ought to keep his goddamn big mouth shut on foreign affairs, at least until the election's over.
Humphrey's intervention failed to stop a congressional rush to judgment. The politicians wanted to reward the show of firmness, and by an overwhelming vote of 502 to 2, the House and the Senate gave Lyndon Johnson a license that would haunt the institution for decades. The president still hoped he wouldn't have to cash that check, but the overwhelming margin meant that Johnson felt he'd been given all the authority he'd ever need.
And I pledge to all Americans to use those powers with all the wisdom and the judgment that God grants to me.
On August 7, 1964, the president signed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in the East Room of the White House. It would be one of the great ironies of the whole war, the president receiving a blank check for a war he never really wanted, justified by an event that never happened. The Viet Cong was unmoved. Six hours later, they placed a bomb outside the Eden Theater on Flowers Street in Saigon. 1 American and 6 Vietnamese were killed. The American ambassador, Maxwell Taylor, cabled Washington. The U.S. should accelerate its plans to take the war to the north, he said. This was not what Johnson wanted to hear. This was an election year in America. Johnson was running as a peace candidate. Talk of a military escalation was just what his Republican opponent, Senator Barry Goldwater, was advocating. In the fall campaign, the Democrats latched onto an offhand remark by the Republican nominee, Senator Barry Goldwater, that he wouldn't exclude the use of nuclear weapons in Vietnam.
8, 9.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0. These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark, we must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
LBJ had to perform a balancing act. If he pulled out, he'd appear weak. If he escalated, he faced all-out war that he feared could quickly expand to include 1 million members of the Chinese Red Army. The commander-in-chief was all too aware of the 250 men already lost in this undeclared war, and those who might follow.
As your president, I deal every day with the problems that affect your freedom and affect the peace of the world. And there are those that say that you ought to go north and drop bombs to try to wipe out supply lines. And we think that would escalate the war. And we don't want our American boys to do the fighting for our Asian boys, and we don't want to get involved in a nation with 700 million people and get tied down in a land war in Asia. But we are not about to start another war, and we're not about to run away from where we are.
The problem was that many American boys were already in battle. U.S. troops were increasingly involved in combat missions, even if they were still listed as advisors. U.S. helicopters ferried the South Vietnamese to the front, and instructors went in with the forward teams in search of the Viet Cong. Despite this, Johnson repeated his assurance that he had no plans to escalate the war, a pledge that was undermined by reports out of Saigon that the South was losing, and losing badly. From his ranch in Johnson City, Texas, LBJ received a bleak assessment from his Secretary of Defense.
Tell me, what's your evaluation of this stuff we get at night? I'm just reading it. It doesn't look very good.
Oh, it doesn't look good, Mr. President. It's no different, though, than we've seen here and sensed here, you know, for some time. But I think the odds are we can squeeze through between now and the next several weeks. But it certainly is a weak situation. I really don't think there's much we can do in the next several weeks to change the outlook. But neither do I think it's going to completely collapse during that period. Afterwards, though, after the election, we've got a real problem on our hands.
So the best the administration could hope for was to contain the enemy until Election Day, reject any request from the Joint Chiefs to strike back at the North Vietnamese, for fear that would escalate the fight and validate Goldwater's strategy. It was a policy that came under threat on September the 15th, when the Pentagon informed the president that in a repeat of the attack on the USS Maddox just 5 weeks earlier, an American destroyer had been fired upon by communist PT boats out in the Gulf of Tonkin. Again, we have recreated the scene.
There's beginning to appear evidence that there is an attack underway and it was intentional. There appear to be 4 PT boats attacking our 2 destroyers. The 2 destroyers are firing all guns, and they think they may have hit 1 PT boat. Now, the problem, it seems to me, is not to hit the PT boats or destroy them. The problem is, if it is an intentional attack, what additional action do we take? Yeah. I've got the chiefs thinking about that now.
Okay.
Thank you.
The chief's recommendation was unanimous: strike back with a massive retaliatory bombing raid into North Vietnam. This time, however, Johnson demanded restraint.
Now, Bob, I have found over the years that we see and we hear and we imagine a lot of things in the form of attacks. I sure want more caution on the part of these admirals about whether they're being fired on or not. Yeah, I don't want them just to have some change-of-life woman running up and saying that she's being raped, when just because a man walks in the room. Because you just came in a few weeks ago and said that damn, they're launching an attack on us, they're firing on us. And we got through with all the firing, which concluded maybe they hadn't fired at all.
As I say, there was either an intentional attack or a substantial engagement. I differentiate one from the other.
What is a substantial engagement? Mean that we could have started it and they just responded.
But they stayed there for an hour or so. The first...
They'd be justified staying, though, if we start shooting at them.
All night, the chiefs prepared their target folders, while a cautious president demanded proof that the attack had actually taken place.
I'll have to decide between now and sometime this evening. I'm going to do what ought to be done, and I'm going to answer them in kind, but I want to be damn sure I'm answering somebody. If a goddamn whale jumps up out there and some lieutenant junior grade starts firing at him and he can't show me some results, I don't want to be over dropping bombs on somebody's capital.
After 12 hours, the president ordered a stand down. There would be no attacks on the North, at least until the election was over. Then, with just 48 hours left before Election Day, the Viet Cong struck again. This time, they launched a heavy mortar attack into a U.S. military compound at Bin Ho, 12 miles north of Saigon. Five airmen were dead, a helicopter and 6 B-57 aircraft destroyed. Ambassador Maxwell Taylor joined General Westmoreland in assessing the damage. Both men recommended reprisal attacks against targets in the North. Johnson again turned them down. He did privately tell his senior military advisor, General Earl Wheeler, to be patient, wait another 48 hours, and then he'd be in a position to decide.
Ladies and gentlemen, President of the United States.
Dawn on Election Day at the LBJ Ranch in Texas brought news of a pending landslide of historic proportions. Goldwater's policy of escalation in Vietnam had been soundly rejected.
Mr. Bundy, I have the Secretary on the line.
Happy Election Day, Mr. Bundy.
How are you?
Fine. Just a moment for the President.
How's things going?
Everything's fine up here. We feel good. And how have you been? It must have been a long day for you.
I just fell apart, Mac. I just fell apart. My back is killing me. I got so sore today, I didn't realize how much I'd been doing and how high up on the mountain I'd been. I've been keyed too high. What happens out yonder?
What happened, sir?
Vietnam.
Nothing out there, but I think they're operating under the assumption that we're really getting ready, and I feel in a way that nobody should ask you to make any decision until you're acting with today behind you.
In Washington, even as the returns were coming in, the president's men were at work on a detailed plan to escalate the fight. Within 3 weeks, they would present their recommendations. A sustained U.S.-led bombing campaign against targets inside North Vietnam. On Christmas Eve, the Viet Cong struck in the heart of Saigon, destroying the U.S. officers' billet at the Brinks Hotel, killing 2 Americans and wounding 38 others. McGeorge Bundy sent a memo to the president, suggesting that the current policy could only lead to defeat. America could no longer simply support the South Vietnamese and hope for the best. Vietnam wasn't about supporting an ally, it was about defeating communism. As 1964 came to an end, America had 23,000 military advisors in Vietnam. $140 Americans had died over the past year. 7,000 South Vietnamese and an estimated 17,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese also perished, and there seemed no end to the fighting.
To the best of my ability.
Inauguration Day, 1965.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Johnson had received a massive mandate to build his great society, a domestic agenda that overshadowed even the lofty dreams of Franklin Roosevelt. But the storm clouds were gathering. Johnson knew that Vietnam threatened and that his options were diminishing every day.
If American lives must end and American treasure be spilled in countries that we barely know, then that is the price that change has demanded of conviction and of our enduring covenant.
2 weeks later, that covenant would be tested and lives would be lost.
This is Pleiku, 250 miles north of Saigon, the air base that was ripped by Vietnamese communist guerrillas. 8 Americans died in the attack that brought swift retaliation by U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. President Johnson's Special Assistant for Security Affairs, McGeorge Bundy, arrives at the scene of the Viet Cong raid. He was in Vietnam on a mission for the president when the attacks took place.
Bundy had already decided it was time to launch an aerial assault deep into North Vietnam. The Pleiku attack confirmed that opinion. He cabled the White House imploring Johnson to accept the case for widening the war. Our best chance of success is a policy of sustained reprisal against North Vietnam. We believe the risks of such a policy are real but acceptable. Measured against the cost of defeat, this program seems cheap. Bundy's message reached the White House during the evening of February 6th. Johnson accepted the near unanimous recommendation of his senior advisors that America should retaliate. Operation Flaming Dart was the American response. 49 Navy aircraft took off from the USS Coral Sea and Hancock, the first American airstrike since the Gulf of Tonkin incident 6 months earlier. The Pentagon Command Center was on full alert. Throughout the night, they monitored the planes as they approached their principal target, Dung Hoi, a guerrilla training ground 40 miles north of the 17th parallel. Monitoring the crisis in the Pentagon was McNamara's principal deputy, Cyrus Vance.
Mr. President, we've got the first fragmentary report of after action on that Dung Hoi. Says many fires started in buildings in northern sector Dung Hoi area. Heavy damage to many buildings in the same area. Heavy AA fire observed from 2 gunboats on river north of complex. That's the only information so far, but apparently they did hit it pretty well.
What is this heavy gunboat fire?
That's AA fire against our planes from 2 gunboats on the river north of the complex they were hitting. On the pilot that's down, we know he ejected from his aircraft as it went down. We know no more than that. There is 1 other aircraft as yet unaccounted. That's the information up to date.
It means they got 2 of them down then, probably.
Probably 2 down, sir, I think.
All right, well, you keep on calling me when you get anything.
I certainly will, sir.
But for every American retaliation, the Viet Cong simply raised the stakes. 2 days after authorizing the attack on Dung Hoi, the president received word that the Viet Cong had again responded in kind.
Hello.
Mr. President, we've had another bombing, as you may have heard.
No.
A barracks in a town called Bindia, and we don't yet have, no,